Get him out of here, now." Derek Colton didn't even lower his voice. Bryce Sullivan was still holding the mop when two guards took his arms and dragged him up the aisle of the Sterling Dynamics ballroom, 400 people laughing as they went. His cart went over. Gray water spread across the marble. His lanyard snapped and his badge skated across the floor and stopped face up near the front row. Vanessa Brooks watched from the stage and said nothing. Then Claire Harrington stood. She refused. Vanessa's hand walked past the entire board, knelt, and picked up the badge, then carried it to the microphone. "The one I'm choosing isn't this company. It's the man you just dragged out." 6 weeks before the ballroom at 4 a.m, the 14th floor of Sterling Dynamics belonged to Bryce Sullivan. He liked the hour. The building held its breath then, and the only sound was the drag of his mop across polished concrete in the long, overlapping arcs he had learned to make without thinking. Outside the engineering bay, he stopped the way he always stopped. Someone had left the whiteboard uncapped. Half a derivation ran across it, and near the bottom right, a calibration curve had been sketched and abandoned. The strokes going harder and faster as they went, the way handwriting does when a man is losing an argument with himself. Bryce read it the way other men read a scoreboard. Then his hand came up on its own 2 fingers, reaching for the marker tray, and he caught himself and took the eraser instead, because erasing the boards was on the list, and correcting them was not. At 5:40, he clocked out. At 2 minutes past 6, he came up the outside stairs of a garden apartment complex in Danbury Court, where Mrs. Pruitt from the unit below was already pulling her coat on, and Noah was already dressed. That was the part that got him. 7 years old, and the boy had learned to dress himself in the dark, so nobody would have to hurry. The shirt was on backward. Bryce turned it around without comment. On the kitchen table sat 2 pieces of paper Bryce had not moved in 9 days. One was a surgical scheduling letter from Fairmount Children's. Noah had been born with a hole between the upper chambers of his heart, and the first repair at 3 had held the way the surgeon said it might not. The second had a date on it, now 7 weeks out. The other was an envelope from the billing office he had not opened, because he already knew the number inside, and opening it would only make the number a thing in the room with him. What made both papers survivable was a line on page 31 of the Sterling Dynamics Employee Handbook: medical coverage for custodial and facilities staff vests after 6 consecutive months of employment. 6 months, not 5, not 5.5. He had been there 5 months and 1 week, so the arithmetic of his life was simple and left him no room at all. 3 more weeks of shifts, and the surgery would be covered and Noah would be fine. 3 more weeks of anything. It was also why he took every extra hour the building offered him. Days, doubles, event coverage, the shifts nobody else wanted. Mrs. Pruitt kept the boy in the afternoons for $11 an hour. In the weeks the company spent preparing for its visitor, Bryce was inside that building more than he was out of it. He had not always mopped floors. There had been a firm called Halcyon Systems, a title on a door reading Lead Systems Engineer, and a wife named Emily. She had been driving home on a Thursday when a truck came through a light on Route 9, and after that, there was a boy who was 4 and needed someone in the house at 3 in the afternoon, and Bryce had chosen the boy. 2 years later, when he tried to come back, he learned what a 2-year gap looks like to a person who has never had one. 28 applications. 4 interviews. The same pleasant voice each time explaining that they had gone in a different direction. Sterling Dynamics called him back in a day and a half. They needed nights, and they didn't ask about the gap at all. 291 people worked in that building, and the ones who mattered worked between the 9th floor and the 16th, and everyone understood the difference without anyone having to say it. Derek Colton was the chief engineering officer, and he made the difference audible. On a Tuesday afternoon, 4 hours into a day shift Bryce had volunteered for, he was running the buffer along the corridor outside the main lab when Derek came out with a paper cup in each hand. He did not look down. His elbow caught the doorframe, and one cup went coffee spraying across 11 feet of floor Bryce had finished 20 minutes earlier. Derek looked at the mess, then at Bryce. He did not say sorry or excuse me or anything a person says. He snapped his fingers twice, pointed at the floor, said clean it, and kept walking. One of the engineers behind him made a small, amused sound and did not break stride either, and that was the part that stayed with Bryce afterward. Not contempt, which would at least have required them to think about him. The total absence of it. He got the bucket. 2 floors up in a conference room with the blinds drawn, Vanessa Brooks was preparing the company for its most important guest in a decade. She was 34, had run Sterling Dynamics for 2 years, and was, by most measures, extremely good at it. Her failing was not cruelty. It was that she had come up through a system that scored people by title and output, and she had won under it. And so she had never once thought to ask whether it measured the right thing. Near the end of that meeting, she said, "For Visitor Week, I want us to optimize the presentation of frontline staff, custodial facilities food service, reschedule them out of the guest corridors." Nobody in the room heard anything unusual in it. Neither did she. Derek made it a policy by Thursday. The only person in the building who called Bryce by his name was Walter Reyes, who had guarded the North Lobby for 19 years and had a bad knee and a nephew in the Coast Guard. Walter had worked out inside a month that the new night janitor was not what he appeared to be, because he had watched him stand in front of a stalled elevator panel and diagnose it out loud correctly before the technician arrived. They ate together sometimes at the end of Bryce's shift in the loading dock. "You keep sending those things," Walter said one night, chewing. Bryce turned his phone around so the older man could see the screen. It was the internal submission portal, the one advertised on stairwell posters, with the words, "Every voice builds the future," printed under a photograph of a sunrise. It stamped every entry with a time and an employee number. 17 entries. Numbers 1 through 17, going back 4.5 months. The response column was empty all the way down. Walter looked at it for a while. 17. 17, Bryce agreed, and put the phone away, and went back to his sandwich, and did not say the thing he was thinking, which was that number 9 had taken him 11 nights to write. Claire Harrington arrived on a Monday, which was a problem, because Sterling Dynamics had been told she was arriving on Wednesday. She was 58, and ran a fund with an appetite for exactly one very large deal a year, and she had learned long ago that a company shows you its costume on the day it expects you and its face on the day it doesn't. So she came in through the North Lobby in a gray raincoat and told the desk she had an appointment with Human Resources at 11. She met Bryce 3 times in 2 days. The first time she asked for the annex, and he did not point. He said the signage in that wing was genuinely bad, walked her the length of 2 corridors and around a corner that wasn't on any of the maps, and left her at the door. The second time she dropped a folder on the 4th floor landing, and paper went everywhere. He gathered it, squared the edges against the floor, and handed it back, and Claire, watching his eyes rather than his hands, noted that he had not read a single page. The header on the top sheet said, "Harrington Capital Confidential," in letters an inch high. The third time she found him refilling a dispenser and asked him casually what he made of the company. He considered it long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. "The technology here is very good," Bryce said. "It's just that there are about 300 people in this building, and only 30 of them are counted as working." Claire went back to her hotel and wrote the sentence in a notebook, word for word. The stage walkthrough for the ceremony was Thursday afternoon, and Bryce was assigned to prep the ballroom. He was 30 feet from the platform wiping down the chair rails when Derek came in with the audiovisual team and saw him. Derek did not shout. He crossed the room with his hands in his pockets, stopped a comfortable distance away, and spoke in a voice that was warm, almost kind, which was worse than the coffee had been. "Hey, it's nothing you did wrong." He gestured vaguely at Bryce at the cart at the general fact of him. "The context just isn't right for you. Do me a favor and use the service door. Guests will be coming through the main one." Vanessa was 8 feet away with a tablet in her hands. She heard all of it. She could have said that the man was doing the job the schedule had assigned him. Instead, she looked up, met Derek's eye, nodded once, and went back to the tablet. Bryce did not argue. He gathered his supplies, took the cart to the service door, and went out through it. On the mezzanine above, Claire Harrington had watched the whole exchange over the rail. Her hand had closed hard enough around her pen to whiten the knuckle. She was halfway out of the chair before she stopped herself, and she sat back down slowly. And the reason she gave herself was one she did not enjoy. Not yet. Say something now, and they'll simply perform a different play for me. She stayed where she was, and she watched the service door swing shut, and she did not forgive herself for it. The story about the stage walkthrough reached the loading dock before Bryce did. By Friday morning, it had hardened into a version with edges. The janitor had been in the center aisle when the lighting crew needed it. The janitor had argued. The janitor had to be walked out by a supervisor, and if Miss Harrington had come through that door 10 minutes earlier, the whole account might have gone sideways. None of it was true, and neither fact turned out to matter. 2 women from accounts receivable stopped talking when he wheeled past and started again after he turned the corner. On Monday, there was an index card taped to his locker. "Know your place" in blue ballpoint block capitals unsigned. Bryce peeled it off, folded it, and dropped it in the bin by the door. He did not ask anyone about it. He put on his shirt and went upstairs and started on 11. That night, he came home at 10 past 6, and Noah was at the table with a bowl of cereal and 1 sock. "Was today a good day?" the boy asked the way he asked every morning. "Pretty good," Bryce said, and found the other sock behind the couch. He told himself it was not really a lie. A lie was something you said to protect yourself. On Saturday, Noah brought him a sheet of manila paper with the corners already soft from handling. The assignment printed across the top said, "My dad's job." The drawing had a gray tower on it, going right off the top edge of the page rows of windows, getting smaller and crookeder as they climbed. In front of it stood a man twice the height of the building, holding a mop, colored in with careful overlapping strokes of brown. "You made me bigger than the building," Bryce said. Noah looked at it as though this were obvious. "I drew you biggest because you make the whole building clean." Bryce said it was a very good drawing. Then he got up and ran water at the sink that he did not need, and Noah went back to the television. Later, after the boy was asleep, Bryce took the handbook out of the drawer where he kept the surgical letter and read page 31 again. He knew the first sentence by heart. It was the second one he had never bothered with, because it had never mattered before. Coverage terminates on the employee's final day of active employment. 3 more weeks to the 6-month mark. 4 weeks after that, a Tuesday morning at Fairmount Children's, and a surgeon named Ellison, who had already put his hands inside his son's chest once. So the second rule meant the first was not a finish line. It meant that from here until that Tuesday, whatever they did to him, he stayed. The demonstration was the following Wednesday in the glass conference room on 15, the first time Sterling Dynamics ran Kestrel live in front of the woman who might buy it. Kestrel was the reason Claire Harrington was in the building at all. A self-correcting calibration layer for industrial sensor arrays, the thing that kept 1,000 instruments honest, without a technician walking the floor with a laptop. Derek Colton had presented it to the board in March under his own name, and had been presenting it to everyone else ever since. Claire sat in the second row with her notebook closed. Bryce was there because installers had left adhesive haze along the baseboards the week before, and the only window for the job was the back third of the room during business hours, which was why he had picked up the day. 9 minutes into the run, the array went out from under them. The projection wall showed 48 sensor channels drifting apart like a hand opening. The engineer at the console said the compensation loop was overcorrecting. Another said it was undercorrecting. 20 minutes went by. Somebody restarted the service, which did nothing. Derek's neck had gone red above the collar. "This is a hardware issue," he said to Claire in the voice of a man laying track ahead of a train. "These are prototype boards. In deployment, you'd be on production silicon, and we would not be looking at this." Bryce had stopped working at some point without noticing. He stood at the back with the mop handle in both hands and his eyes on Channel 14, and Walter Reyes, who had come up to escort a courier and stayed, stood next to him. "It isn't the hardware," Bryce said low, the way a man says something to relieve pressure rather than to be heard. "They've got the calibration threshold fixed. Sensors drift with temperature, and the temperature in that server room changes by the hour." He did not say it loudly, but the room had gone quiet enough that a woman in the second row heard every word. Claire Harrington stood up. Let him try. Derek turned, saw who she meant, and produced a laugh that did not survive contact with her face. "Miss Harrington, he's custodial staff." "I'm aware of what he's wearing," Claire said. "Let him try." Bryce set the mop against the wall. He crossed the room, every eye going with him, and the engineer at the console got out of the chair, the way a man does when he has been told to by someone who owns the building. He did not sit down. He leaned over the keyboard and read the log for 40 seconds. Then he asked for the threshold to be unpinned and tied to the intake thermistor, and for the correction window to be widened at the low end, and typed the change himself, because it was faster than explaining it. 4 minutes. That was how long it took. The 48 channels came back together on the wall and sat down on top of one another and stayed there. It was the logic out of submission number 9. He had written it on 11 consecutive nights in the loading dock in the Notes app on his phone, one thumb at a time, and pressed send on it 4 months and 1 week ago. Nobody in that room knew. Derek Colton crossed to the front and picked up the handheld microphone, and his voice came out of the ceiling smooth and warm and completely restored. "And there it is. That's exactly the thermal variable my team flagged in review. It's what we've been running down all quarter. Good to see it confirmed in front of everybody." The room applauded. They applauded for 8 or 9 seconds, real applause, relieved and generous, and it went to the man holding the microphone. Bryce straightened up from the console, walked back to the rear of the room, picked up the mop, and started again, where he had left off. Claire did not look at the screen or at Derek. She turned her head and looked directly at Vanessa Brooks, standing at the end of the front row. Vanessa was applauding too, lightly with her eyes on her chief engineering officer, and there was nothing on her face except the mild satisfaction of an executive whose demonstration has been salvaged. Claire wrote nothing in the notebook. The next day she ate lunch in the staff cafeteria on the second floor, which no one from the executive tier had done in living memory across from Walter Reyes. She did not send anyone to look into Bryce Sullivan. She asked the man who had known him longest. Walter told her about Halcyon Systems and the title Bryce used to have there, and the wife who died on Route 9 when the boy was 4. He told her Bryce came in 40 minutes early on most shifts to read technical binders in the paper archive that nobody had signed out since the 2000s. "And he's never missed a day," Walter said. "Not one. His boy was admitted overnight in April, and he clocked in at 10 and worked the whole shift and went back to the hospital at 6. Then, Walter told her about the portal because he had seen the screen. Claire had her assistant request the internal submission log that afternoon as an investor conducting diligence on the company's innovation pipeline. The request was so boring it was approved within the hour by someone in compliance who never read it. 17 entries. Employee number 471. Time stamps on every one, response field blank on every one. She opened number 9. It was 1,100 words long, titled Thermal Adaptive Calibration for Distributed Sensor Arrays, and it contained in plain, unpolished language the entire core of the thing. Sterling Dynamics was preparing to sell her for $400 million. It was time-stamped 4 months and 8 days before Derek Colton's March presentation to the board. Claire sat with the screen in front of her for a long while, and what she felt was not surprise. She had come here to evaluate an unfair company. She was now looking at a theft. Claire Harrington set 2 traps, and she set them on the same day because she wanted them answered by the same building on the same morning. The first cost her nothing but a phone call. Ray Doherty had worked for her for 26 years and had the good fortune to look like nobody in particular, a heavy man in his 60s in a windbreaker. At 9:10, he came through the north lobby carrying a file box that weighed 31 pounds, because Claire had told him to make it weigh something. He set it down near the elevator bank, put his hands on his knees, and waited to be helped. He waited 11 minutes. 2 managers came out of the elevator, saw a large man breathing hard beside a box, and went around him without breaking stride. A woman from marketing asked if he was all right, and when he said he needed facilities engineering on the annex side, she pointed toward the reception desk 40 feet away and kept walking. At 11 minutes, a cart stopped. Bryce Sullivan crouched, got his hands under the box, and stood up with it. He said what he had said to Claire in that same lobby 2 weeks earlier, that the signage in the annex was genuinely bad, and nobody had ever fixed it, and carried the box up 3 floors and along 2 corridors and set it down inside the right door. Then he went back down, came up again 90 seconds later, and handed Ray Doherty a bottle of water out of his own lunch bag. Ray called Claire from the stairwell. He was not a sentimental man, and his report was 4 sentences long. The last one was, he came back for the water. The second trap was more expensive because it required Claire to put a lie in writing. The technical annex her fund submitted that week contained an error on page 12. A power density coefficient had been expressed in kilowatts per square meter, where the surrounding math required watts per square centimeter. It was off by a factor of 10,000, the kind of thing a competent engineer catches in under a minute, and a frightened one decides not to mention. Sterling Dynamics caught it. She knew because the response deck came back with the figure carried forward exactly as written, and nobody carries a number forward exactly as written without having looked at it. Nobody said a word to her. Worse, Derek Colton built on it. Slide 19 was an optimization curve keyed off that coefficient headlined with a 30% efficiency margin that existed entirely because the input was wrong by 4 orders of magnitude. He had built a beautiful room on a foundation 10,000 times too weak, rather than risk telling the investor she had made a mistake. On Thursday night, Bryce cleaned the conference room on 15 after the deck review, and there were 9 printed copies in the recycling bin, and one of them had landed face up and open. He read page 12 standing there with a bag of trash in one hand 3 times, because the first 2 times he assumed he had misread it. Then he tore the corner off a fresh copy, wrote on the back of it in pencil, folded it once, and put it in Walter Reyes's hand at the end of the shift. The coefficient on page 12 is in the wrong units. Watts per square centimeter, not kilowatts per square meter. Slide 19 is built on it. If anyone runs this live at that density, it will take out the entire array and possibly the cabinet. I'm not sending it by email because it isn't my place to. Walter looked at the note and then at Bryce. Not your place. They'll ignore it if it comes from me, Bryce said. They might read it if it comes from you. Claire had the note in her hand by 9 the next morning. She found Bryce 2 days later at 5 in the morning in the emergency stairwell between 11 and 12, where he sat for 15 minutes at the end of every night shift with his back against the cinder block. She came down 4 steps and sat on the landing above him with her coat across her knees, and he did not seem surprised, and he did not stand up. He knew who she was now. Everyone in the building did. What she had not told him or anyone else there was anything about herself. She asked him what he would fix first, if it were his. He answered for close to 10 minutes, And Claire, who had listened to hundreds of executives describe their own companies, listened to a man with a mop describe one better than any of them. He talked about how a defect reported by a night technician had to pass through 4 people who were each rewarded for reporting that there were no defects. He talked about what the submission portal was actually for, which was not collecting ideas, but demonstrating that ideas were collected. He talked about the middle layer, where every proposal went to die, not out of malice, but because the men in that layer were measured on delivery dates, and an idea is a threat to a delivery date. The other 270 people in this building see everything and report nothing, he said. The last one who reported something is still hearing about it. Claire asked him the question she had come down 4 flights to ask. "Why don't you leave?" Bryce looked at his hands. "My coverage vested last Tuesday," he said. 6 months. But it ends the day I stop working here, and my son has surgery in 2 weeks. So I don't leave. That's the whole answer. There isn't a better one. Claire told him then about her father, who had swept the finishing floor of a textile mill in Fall River on the overnight for 19 years, and came home smelling of lint and machine oil. She told him she had started at 19, cleaning offices for a brokerage house, and had learned the difference between a good firm and a bad one long before she could have explained it. "People speak very freely in front of the person mopping the floor, Mr. Sullivan," she said. "I learned more that way than I ever did from a degree." She went up the stairs at 6:10. By the time she reached the lobby, she had decided that Harrington Capital would not be investing $1 in Sterling Dynamics. She had not yet decided what she was going to do instead. What Claire did next, she did in the mildest possible language, and it detonated inside Sterling Dynamics for 8 straight days. She informed Vanessa Brooks that before the announcement, she wished to meet every individual who had contributed materially to Kestrel: engineering quality integration, contractors, support staff. Vanessa read the message twice and understood it as an eccentricity, a wealthy woman's fashionable interest in the shop floor. She replied that Sterling Dynamics would be delighted. Then she called Derek Colton into her office and closed the door. What they built over the next week was not a conspiracy. Neither of them said the name Bryce Sullivan out loud in that room. It was done the way these things are always done, in the passive voice, by people who intended to be able to say afterward that they had merely been managing an event. Derek changed the custodial rotation. The night lead was moved to a 2 to 6 in the morning window for the visitor period described in the memo as a measure to minimize service disruption in guest-facing zones. It meant Bryce Sullivan would be off the property by sunrise every day between then and the ceremony, and would meet no one. It also cut 20 hours a week out of his pay, and 20 hours was the difference between the electric bill being early and the electric bill being late. He asked his supervisor and was told it was temporary and came from above. He said all right, and asked Mrs. Pruitt to take Noah from 1:30 in the morning and paid her out of money he had stopped earning. And on the Tuesday before the announcement, Vanessa signed the access schedule for the ballroom. It was a routine document, 4 pages of names and clearances and vendor badges. On page 3, under a heading reading Excluded Non-Essential Personnel, there were 6 names, and the 4th was Sullivan B., Custodial EMP 4471. She initialed the page. Then, because the compliance template required a stated reason for any exclusion and the drop-down options did not fit, she wrote one by hand in the margin. Not consistent with the image of the event, she wrote it in 11 seconds and did not think about it again. Bryce noticed none of it. He cleaned floors that would be walked on by people who had been handed a document with his name on it, and he did not know the document existed, and he did it well. Claire watched from the outside, and what hardened in her was not anger at Derek Colton, who was a thief and could be dealt with the way thieves are dealt with. It was that the thing had no center. The exclusion had been produced by a schedule, the schedule by a policy, the policy by a phrase in a meeting about optimizing the presentation of frontline staff, and every person in the chain had performed a small, reasonable, deniable act. That was not a bad man. That was a culture, and a culture does not stop when you fire someone. She stopped trying to persuade Sterling Dynamics of anything. She started preparing. 3 weeks earlier, operations had issued a standing order mobilizing every custodial employee in the building from 7 in the morning on announcement day, overriding all posted shift schedules for that date. Derek Colton had approved it electronically, along with 11 other routine items without opening it. So on the morning of the announcement, Bryce Sullivan was required to be in that ballroom by the same company that had put his name on page 3. Mrs. Pruitt called at 6:20 to say she could not take him after all. Her daughter had run a fever of 103 all night, and Bryce said, "Of course," and hung up and stood in the kitchen doing the arithmetic single fathers do, which has no good answer in it anywhere. Missing an all-hands assignment was a written warning, and 2 written warnings inside a benefits year triggered a review, and a review could end an employment, and his son's surgery was 6 days away and rode entirely on that employment continuing. So he took Noah with him. He signed him in at the north desk with Walter set him up in the staff break room on the mezzanine with a juice box, a coloring book, and the 24-pack of colored pencils, and crouched down to eye level. "You stay in this room," Bryce said. "I'm right downstairs. 2 hours. Can I draw the building again? Draw whatever you want, buddy." By 9, the ballroom held 400 people. Press along the left wall, the board in the front 2 rows, and Vanessa Brooks up on the stage in a navy suit checking her notes for the 11th time. At 9:14, a caterer's ice tub failed on the trolley in the main aisle and put 4 gallons of water across the marble. The floor lead keyed his radio and called for custodial. The closest custodial employee in the building was standing 30 feet away in the service corridor, and the schedule that excluded Bryce Sullivan from that room was on page 3 of a document the floor lead had never read. Bryce came out with a wet vac cart and started at the near end of the spill because 400 people were about to walk across it in dress shoes. The main doors opened at 9:17, and Claire Harrington came in. Derek Colton saw it from the stage steps, the investor entering the photographer's turning, and a man in a gray custodial uniform on his knees in the center aisle. He did not think about it. That was the truth of it, and it was the worst thing about him. He looked at the 2 security officers by the door and made a short chopping motion. "Get him out of here, now." The first guard took Bryce's left arm above the elbow. Bryce came up off his knee and said clearly and without heat, "I'm doing the job I was assigned. There's 4 gallons of water on this floor." The second guard took the other arm. They walked him up the aisle. He did not resist. A man whose son has surgery in 6 days does not resist a security officer. Derek was already at the lectern with the handheld microphone. "Apologies, everybody." His voice came out of the ceiling easy and amused, pitched perfectly for the room. "Small custodial staffing issue. We'll take care of it." 400 people laughed. It was not vicious laughter. It never is. It was the loose, comfortable laughter of a room agreeing that nothing important is happening. The cart went over past row 6. The tank came open, and gray water spread across the stone in a widening sheet. The lanyard around Bryce's neck caught on the guard's forearm, and the clip snapped, and his badge skated 11 feet across the wet floor and stopped face up near the front row, his own photograph looking straight up at the chandeliers. Vanessa Brooks watched it from the stage with the room laughing and said nothing at all. And in the doorway of the mezzanine stairwell where he had come down looking for a bathroom, Noah Sullivan stood holding a green-colored pencil and saw all of it. "Dad?" Nobody heard him, except a young woman from events who took him gently by the shoulder and steered him back up the stairs. They let go of Bryce in the service corridor, and one of the guards said not unkindly that he was sorry that he was just doing what he was told. He was not angry. He kept waiting for the anger, and it did not arrive, and what came instead was worse. It was shame. Not for himself, he had carried their opinion of him for 6 months, and it had grown light. It was that his son had seen it. That the boy who had drawn him taller than the building had watched 400 adults laugh while 2 men carried his father up an aisle. He found Noah at the top of the stairs, sitting on the second step, with the coloring book closed on his knees. Bryce sat down beside him, wound the broken cord around his fingers, and put it in his pocket. "Are you in trouble?" Noah asked. "No." "Why were they laughing?" Bryce looked at the wall across from them for a while. He thought about the 6 days and page 31, and Dr. Ellison, and the number in the envelope he had never opened. He understood exactly what he was choosing and what it would cost, and he made himself say it anyway. "We're going home, buddy. I'm not coming back here. But your job?" "Some things cost more than money," Bryce said. "I'll figure the rest out." Inside the ballroom, 399 people were settling back into their seats. Vanessa Brooks stepped to the front of the stage and extended her hand toward the second row, and 400 faces turned to watch the moment the photographers had come for. Claire Harrington stood up. She did not take the hand. She walked past Vanessa Brooks and past the entire board of Sterling Dynamics and down the length of the aisle through the water, and she knelt and picked the badge up off the floor and cleaned it with her thumb. Then she carried it back to the microphone. "The one I'm choosing isn't this company," she said. "It's the man you just dragged out. His name is Bryce Sullivan." Bryce got as far as the north desk. Walter Reyes came out from behind it, put a hand flat on the boy's shoulder, and said only, "Come with me." He did not explain. He walked them back toward a door neither of them had ever used. Inside the ballroom, Vanessa Brooks reached the second microphone before anyone else moved. "I think there's been a misunderstanding, Miss Harrington. If we could take 5 minutes offline." "No," Claire said. "You've had 6 weeks offline." She set the broken badge on the lectern and handed a small drive to the audiovisual technician, who looked at Vanessa and then took it anyway. The first document went up 12 feet high behind her. "This is your own internal submission portal. Your posters call it Every Voice Builds the Future. Entry number 9. Thermal adaptive calibration for distributed sensor arrays. Employee number 4471. She let the room read the timestamp. "Filed 4 months and 8 days before Mr. Colton presented Kestrel to your board as his own work. Before anyone reaches for the obvious defense, I have read your custodial employment agreement. It contains no assignment of intellectual property. Not one line. Your engineers sign a 4-page clause. Your janitors sign nothing because nobody in this building could imagine a janitor inventing anything. Kestrel does not belong to Sterling Dynamics. It never did." Derek Colton had gone the color of paper. He started forward and the 2 engineers nearest him stepped back, which was the moment the room turned. The second image was a photograph of a torn corner of paper with pencil on it. "2 weeks ago, the technical annex my fund submitted to you contained an error on page 12. I put it there. A power density coefficient in the wrong units, wrong by a factor of 10,000. Your engineers found it said nothing, and Mr. Colton built slide 19 on top of it and claimed a 30% efficiency margin that does not exist." She looked toward the press wall. "One person in this building told me. He wrote it in pencil on the back of a scrap and handed it to a security guard because he did not believe he was permitted to send an email." The third page went up and Claire read the 4th line aloud. "Excluded non-essential personnel. Sullivan B. Custodial Employee 4471. She turned to look at Vanessa. "And in the margin, the reason in handwriting, not consistent with the image of the event. Those are your initials beside it." Vanessa Brooks looked at her own handwriting, 12 feet tall, in front of 400 people. She had written it in 11 seconds. "Your technology is very good," Claire said, and her voice never rose once. "What you have shown me is how you treat the person who made it. I don't invest in patents. I invest in the people who will make the next one, And I have watched this building spend 6 weeks explaining to that man that he is furniture. There are about 300 people here, and 30 of them are counted as working. That isn't mine. He said it to me in a hallway when he had no idea who I was. Walter Reyes brought them in through the side door. Bryce Sullivan came into that ballroom still in the gray uniform, his son's hand in his. 400 people stood up, and for several seconds, he did not understand that the sound was for him. They talked afterward in an empty conference room, Noah asleep across 2 chairs. Claire offered him a seat at Harrington Capital as operating advisor and technical partner with the Kestrel work carried out of Sterling Dynamics and rebuilt under his own name. I haven't touched a line of code in 3 years, Bryce said. You watched a man get humiliated in front of his kid, and now you feel something about it. That's not a hiring decision. That's pity. Claire regarded him across the table. You fixed what 12 engineers couldn't in 4 minutes holding a mop, she said. I have never pitied anyone to the tune of $400 million. Mr. Sullivan and I do not intend to start with you. He was quiet for a while and then told her the only thing that actually mattered. My son has surgery in 6 days. My coverage ends the day I stop working here. That's the whole negotiation. Claire did not ask Sterling Dynamics for anything. She put him on her own payroll that afternoon. The fund's plan carried no waiting period, and where it left a gap, Harrington Capital paid the balance directly to Fairmount Children's. The paperwork took 9 minutes, and Dr. Ellison's Tuesday did not move. 2 days later, Vanessa Brooks stood in the atrium and addressed every employee in the building, and she did not talk about the investment. I want to be accurate about what I did, because the accurate version is worse, she said. I never ordered anyone to humiliate Bryce Sullivan. I stood 8 feet away when Derek told him the context wasn't right for him, and I heard it, and I nodded. I signed the page. I wrote the reason myself. I have spent 2 years telling you this company runs on merit, and the most valuable idea we ever owned sat unread in our own portal for 4 months because of who submitted it. That was not a process failure. That was me. Bryce accepted the apology privately in her office and meant it, and then told her he was leaving anyway. He had spent 6 months learning what the building thought he was and could not unlearn it, standing inside it. Derek Colton was terminated that week. The intellectual property litigation ran 11 months, and he did not win any part of it. A year later, Bryce Sullivan was an operating partner across 9 companies, and the first condition he wrote into every one of them was a single paragraph. Every internal submission from any employee at any level receives a substantive written response from a named human being within 14 days. No exceptions for support staff contractors or night shift. He called it Rule Number 9. People assumed it referred to something technical, and he let them think so for a month before he explained. Walter Reyes ran security and staff support across the Harrington portfolio, now out of an office with a window, which he mentioned to his nephew in the Coast Guard more often than was strictly necessary. Noah's chest healed into a line you had to know about to find. He was 8.5 and cleared for soccer, and in November he brought home another sheet of manila paper. It was the same drawing. The gray tower going off the top edge, the windows getting smaller and crookeder as they climbed a man in front of it, twice the height of the building. Older hand, steadier lines. This time there were letters on the side of the tower, and the letters were his father's name. The mop was still there, colored in brown with the same careful strokes. I can take it out, Noah said. I know you don't do that job now. Leave it in, Bryce told him. Sterling Dynamics restructured that spring, and it was neither a collapse nor a redemption, but something slower and more useful than either. Vanessa Brooks was still the chief executive. She had been offered the chance to resign and declined it on the grounds that the person who built the culture ought to be the one who has to dismantle it. On her desk, propped against the base of the lamp, where she could not avoid it, was an employee badge with a broken cord. Number 4471, the plastic still faintly clouded from the water on the ballroom floor. Don't measure a person by their job, their uniform, or the title on their door. You may be standing next to the smartest person in the room, and you will never know it if you never once asked them their name.